Good afternoon. I'm Keela Crane, Deputy Legal Director for the Michigan Department of State, and we are thrilled to be presenting a timely program brought to you by the American Bar Association section on civil rights and social justice entitled A Call to Action. Where do we go from here? This is our final session in the CRSJ's latest initiative, Civil Rights Lawyer Boot Camp, which has been a 2-day virtual summit that serves as a comprehensive resource for young lawyers, experienced lawyers, law students, public service attorneys, and advocates from all backgrounds. We are so grateful that you have made it to the end of this 2-day summit with us, and we explore ways that you can make an impact in your local communities about the issues that you care about the most. So we do ask that you consider becoming more involved with CRSJ. You can make a donation and update us about your amazing work and join the American Bar Association. So we hope that you take the time at the end of the program as well to complete our session and boot camp evaluation. And we really would appreciate your thoughtful feedback. During today's program, we encourage you to ask questions of our panelists. They're eager to hear from you and answer your questions, but please place those in the Q&A feature, not in the chat. But you can also chat with each other in the chat function. If you don't see the controls, please ensure that your screen is not idle, so just move your mouse a little bit. We'll be monitoring the Q&A function and do our best to answer as many of your questions as possible as time permits. And we will also be sharing a recording of the program with everyone who has registered. And we encourage you to share along with your network so they can get this great information. And we'll also have some information on YouTube as well. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with our panel today. We have a wonderful group of panelists that are going to get us fired up and ready to go. So, I'll introduce first Ebony Guerrier. She is counsel for Singleton Schreiber Denver, and she's based out of Arizona. Afternoon, Ebony, or morning, Ebony. We also have Paul M. Smith, visiting professor at the Georgetown University Law Center. Morning, Paul, or afternoon, Paul.
Hello.
And we also have Ruby Robinson, senior managing attorney in the Michigan Immigrants' Rights Center, here with me in the Great Lakes State. Hey, Ruby.
Hi, Ebony. Or hi, Kyla.
No worries. So we will go ahead and get started. We'll first hear from each of our panelists about their area of expertise, and then we will have some questions back and forth with the panelists and involve your questions as well. So we'll first start out with Paul. Paul's going to talk to us a little bit about the impact of the 2024 election and its aftermath on LGBTQ rights and voting rights. Hi,
Thanks,
Paul.
Keela. Thank you very much. Let me start off in my capacity as the proud vice chair of the section of Civil Rights and Social Justice and say congratulations on making it to the end of this, what I think has been spectacular boot camp. And the message of this panel, as Keela said, is going to be everybody needs to get going, get involved. Action is needed. And it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in law school, whether you're a senior lawyer, or whether you're somewhere in between. I can say that from personal experience because when you've been around as long as I have, you've been in lots of different settings, doing lots of different things. I've been at small firms, big firms, nonprofits. Now I'm teaching. But in all of those places, it's possible to do, and I've worked hard to do civil rights, civil liberties work, things that make the country better and are part of why we should value lawyers in this country because we have the power to do so much more than a lot of other people do a lot of the time. So there's no one place to do civil rights. There's no one way to do civil rights, but it is something we all need to do. And right now the situation is becoming truly urgent, as you've been hearing, as the election has produced renewed threats that we've never seen before to the basic constitutional rights of the American people. Take LGBTQ rights for people like me in that community. There was this wonderful moment about 10 years ago where it felt like we had really achieved legal equality. The marriage decision had come down. After decades of hard sweat that I was proud to be involved in prior to 2015, it felt like that we'd reached the great destination. But what's happened since is a backlash, focusing primarily on the most vulnerable people in the LGBTQ community, transgender people, non-binary people, a really strong organized effort focusing on bathrooms and athletics and medical care and parental consent and a whole variety of issues. And after 10 years of sort of mounting efforts to demonize that population of people, we now have a president who has effectively announced that transgender people don't exist, or at least we shouldn't accept their existence. We have a Supreme Court that seems to be poised to say that states can ban gender-affirming medical care for trans youth. I hope not, but that seems to be where they're headed. And most stunningly to me, just recently, we heard that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is refusing to entertain Title VII claims by people just because they're transgender claims. They don't accept those anymore, apparently. So they've become a discriminating agency rather than the anti-discriminating agency. It's really terrible. And at the local level, what does one hear? One hears over and over again about harassment of people perceived as being part of the LGBTQ community that's been encouraged at the national level and is playing out all over the country. Really, this is an area where if these are issues that you care about, you should get involved. And there's so many different ways you can get involved in local organizations and state organizations and national organizations. There's so many, the need is tremendous to respond to what is really a renewed effort to try to put the LGBTQ community back where it was 25, 30, 40 years ago. And I don't see any sign that that's going to stop unless we make it stop. So we have to fight back. The other area that I've done a lot of work over the years is in voting rights and redistricting. And that's an area where part of the problem has been that the court itself has been attacking the Voting Rights Act for some number of years. The most important case was Shelby County 12 years ago, which basically disempowered the Justice Department from using its preclearance mechanism to keep an eye on what's been going on in voting rights and to push back on it. And the result has been more pressure on individual advocates at the local level to find out what's going on and to bring individual lawsuits, which is not an easy way to protect voting rights, but it is the protection that we have. So this again is an area where the need is great. We've seen law after law being passed at the state level trying to prevent people from being able to vote, particularly people of color. And at the local level, all kinds of shenanigans going on with voting places and barriers to voting and stuff. So again, I would say, please get involved in voting rights. It is, of course, fundamental to our democracy, an area where the need is ever greater. So those are the two things I would do in sort of a prefatory mode here. But let me mention what I tell law students, because I'm a law professor now. Those who are going off to private practice in law firms, which I think is just fine. I did it myself. But one of the things I tell them is make sure you go to a place where there's lots of opportunity for pro bono work. And when you get there, make sure you take that opportunity to do the civil rights work that you care about. You'll be a much more happy lawyer. You'll be more proud of yourself as an individual. And you can be a part of protecting this country and not just billing your time. So that's an important thing for people in the private practice sector to do. And wherever you are, again, please do get involved, and including getting involved in the organized bar, parts of the organized bar, like the section of civil rights and social justice, which is so important as itself as an advocate of social justice and civil rights. With that, Keela, I think I will stop, and I look forward to your questions and the questions from the audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. Your last point about getting in where you fit in is so really important. As the former assistant general counsel for the NAACP, we worked so often with folks from the private bar to effectuate change. And so that I think that is so critical for law students to understand that you don't have to work at a civil rights organization to advance civil rights. You do it where you can.
Absolutely. There's a big part of the movement for civil rights is people in private practice.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Next up, Ruby. There's been no shortage of work that folks like Ruby Robinson has been doing really since the election took place 10 lifetimes ago or a couple months ago, depending upon how you measure time. But we're so grateful for the work that he does here in my state. So Ruby, please do talk about the impact of the 2024 election on all things immigration.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm really happy to be here today to be able to talk about that. If I really were to talk about the impacts of the election, like you would just all be crying and depressed. So I'm going to not do that. When you turn on the news, when you're talking to friends and colleagues and others, like you will see this. And in reality, it's like 3 times as bad as what you're seeing and hearing. So, the question was like, what does the landscape look like? It is like a hellscape and it's like a tsunami after tsunami. And at the same time, like we are here today, you are here today to learn more about what's available and ways for you to really ensure that there is access to justice. And, to the extent that, today we still have a functioning constitution and the limited due processes within our immigration systems, let's use them. And so we want to find ways for you to be able to be plugged in to ensure that your clients and the communities really do have meaningful access to justice, despite every single attempt by this administration to deny those. And the first thing that I will just say, and I would be remiss if I didn't say it, is that if you are able to make financial contributions to legal service providers, providing these critical, legal services, across the board, every legal service provider is struggling and is, a target, but certainly in the immigration space, in which there is no Sixth Amendment rights to government-appointed counsel, in which the Legal Service Corporation regulations specifically prohibit organizations from providing legal services to a majority of non-citizens. They need this assistance, more financial assistance, more than ever. So to the extent that you can do so, we would appreciate that. It may be easy to put your head in the sand and like tune out what's going on because it is overwhelming and it's too much. But to the extent that you can pay attention and push back, that it's so important. Just as an example, we are seeing removal proceedings today, deportation proceedings. The average cost of representation is $10,000 here in Michigan. And I would assume it's going to be so much higher, in other locations around the country. And this indicates a few things. One, it indicates the demand for the services, the unaffordability of these services, and anything that people can offer, short. I mean, if that's what you want to go into and do, like that's great, and like I support that because the need is out there. But anything from pro bono to low bono to full representation assistance, helping people in deportation proceedings, helping people become naturalized U.S. citizens. There are over 1 million permanent residents in this country today who could become citizens and haven't, right? So once you become a citizen, you can't be deported. Well, the law says you should not be deported. What happens in reality might be different from the United States. So there's lots of ways to get involved in doing that type of work. There's a lot of appellate work. If you do federal courts work, habeas work about detention conditions, releasing individuals from detention, so critical. And so immigration law might be one of the most complex, Byzantine, and ever-changing areas of the law. And so if you're still in law school, I encourage you to take Fed courts and I encourage you to take immigration law courses. If you're not in law school anymore, there are lots of opportunities to learn. The ABA has a Commission on Immigration, and they have several projects within the Commission on Immigration to provide pro bono assistance. The Immigrant Legal Resource Center, ILRC, has trainings on a regular basis. They also have fantastic publications designed for beginners and experts in immigration law, so definitely check those out. And then the affinity bar for attorneys who practice immigration law. I try not to refer to myself as an immigration attorney. I'm an attorney who practices immigration law because we do, we wear lots of hats, and my practice is not solely limited to immigration. And so if anybody is interested in going into immigration law, don't call yourself solely an immigration attorney. You're an attorney who specializes in or has a practice of immigration law, but your clients and what you focus on is going to be beyond immigration law. The American Immigration Lawyers Association, AILA, it's a few $100s to join. They have great resources. Their big annual conference this year is in Denver. It's in June, and they have a beginner track for people who don't know anything about immigration law. And at the end of 3 days, you should be able to do all the things that you need to do. There are other entities too, Center for Gender and Refugee Studies, the American Civil Liberties Union, NLG, others have lots of ways to get involved. And so you can get involved in a pro bono role. You can get involved, like, if this is what you want to make your vocation, and that's great. If you are going to do pro bono legal services, I would say don't reinvent the wheel. There are organizations serving the needs in communities across the country. They don't necessarily need competition. They just need people to be able to help. And many of these organizations allow, and I'll put in the chat what I just said in a moment, but they have established pro bono programs that provide training and mentorship and support. And so, in Michigan, we are one of them, the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center. If you're in the Chicago area, the National Immigrant Justice Center, NIJC, I'll put a bunch of them in the chat later. But they have fantastic pro bono programs designed to for people who are novices and have never touched an immigration case to people who are experts. Had I known that I would have gone into immigration law, I probably would have taken more than high school Spanish. It has served me well, and I'm able to communicate in Spanish, but to the extent that you do know another language or are willing to learn another language, I think that is going to be a critical area for this and really every area of the law. It just sets you apart and allows you to be able to accomplish so much more. To the extent that you don't speak a specific language, interpretation is critical, and there are on-demand interpretation services that are very reasonably priced. One is called Language Line, one is called Genie. They're super easy for billing and coordination, and it makes it's really just a click of a button to make those things work. And so it really behooves you to be able to communicate directly with your client, especially if you're taking pro bono cases. This is the number one reason why we have been told pro bono attorneys have been reluctant to take immigration cases is because of the interpretation. In any other setting, if you said we're unwilling to provide an interpreter, like that could be considered discrimination in some way, but it's not here, right? If a medical provider said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we can't provide interpretation for your appointment," that would be a problem. And so to the extent that you are willing and able, and your firm, if you're connected to one, is willing to commit to providing and ensuring interpretation, that is so important. Beyond immigration law, we also have an employment-related immigration practice here in Michigan, and many places have this as well. So to the extent that you can focus on discrimination cases on the basis of national origin, or sexual harassment in the workplace, or wage claims, in an environment like that, every one of those types of situations in which our clients and workers are going to be, prejudiced and just, exploited, right? Employers are going to take advantage of that. And so, and they know that a lot of workers are unwilling or unable or don't have the means to be able to seek the redress. But you are here and you can help them with their workplace conditions claims, with their unemployment benefits, when they said, "Oh, you were denied, you were fired for performance issues, for workers' compensation matters." And so to the extent that you're able to do any of that, that's important. If you do criminal defense, make sure that you're properly advising your clients about the immigration-related consequences of their activities in the pleas, pursuant to the Supreme Court decision, Padilla versus Kentucky. So again, I'm going to stop talking for a little bit. I'm available. I'll put some of these resources in the chat, and I will turn it over. I think Ebony's next, but I think she gets an introduction first.
Yep. Thanks, Ruby. Excuse me. Thank you. And I'll just double, triple, quadruple down on, if you have additional resources, please pour those into organizations like Ruby's. We need to be able to, if you can't join the fight as a a lawyer or as an advocate, you can join it with your dollars, because we all work together to make this train move down the track. So I just want to implore you that the resources are needed so that we can get this, so that we can advocate and empower those that need us the most. So thank you for that, Ruby. Next, I get to turn to my good friend and my Howard sister, Ebony. One of the things that we don't talk enough about is our environmental landscape and how it is impacted by the decisions that elected officials and those are appointed by elected officials make. So Ebony, let us talk about something that may have not grabbed as many headlines as it should, and this election's impact upon our environmental justice landscape.
Thank you, Keela, and thank you for the kind words in the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Ebony Guerrier. I'm going to talk to you a bit about environmental justice today and sort of where we've come from and where it looks like we might be going. One thing I want to emphasize is, the environmental justice movement really picked up steam alongside the civil rights movement. So we're talking about the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. And, there's been so many great advocates that have fought for some incredible protections, have really won some incredible battles along those years. And so it's been particularly disconcerting to watch a lot of that progress be essentially dismantled over the past, what are we, 90 days, 50 days in. And, even beyond that, the past 4 years, I would say there was a lot of progress that was made with the last administration in terms of environmental justice. A lot of people, at least for myself, environmental justice, I didn't even know what it was until I was in law school. And so I remember taking an environmental law course and still trying to figure out what kind of law I wanted to practice. And my professor mentioned the term environmental justice. And it was at that moment, like literally when he defined environmental justice, that I realized that I'd actually grown up in an environmental justice community. And I just thought all of the stuff that we dealt with was normal, like the weird smells, the noises, the train tracks, just all of the pollution and the smoke and the trash and the liquor stores on every corner. I just thought all of that was normal until I heard the word environmental justice. And so in the past 4 years, it's become a bit more of a household name, but like Keela said, a lot of people still don't necessarily understand what the concept of environmental justice is. And basically the idea behind environmental justice is that, we just want people to bear their fair share of environmental pollution, or basically that no one community should bear more than, a reasonable amount of environmental pollution without reaping the benefits of those environmental benefits. And so you'll see a lot of times communities, particularly communities of color, where there are landfills and there's petrochem facilities and there's, trash heaps and, just lots of sort of blight in communities, vacant land, lots of issues that just aren't necessarily dealt with by municipalities or at the state level. And so folks in these communities have literally been fighting for decades and decades and decades for, just the bare minimum in terms of recognition that these are issues. And so what the last administration did was sort of put those issues at the forefront. There were a lot of executive orders that came out that targeted environmental justice communities in terms of funding, making sure that a lot of funding was going to these communities. And so within the first 50 days of this administration, it's been really sad because most, if not all, I would want to say today, and it changes every day, right? So today, as of today, I would say most of those executive orders have been rescinded. And so I would say among those rescissions include Executive Order 14008, which was called Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad. And that's the one that established Justice 40, right? And the Justice 40 initiative required federal agencies to at least 40% of the benefits of any federal climate programs to disadvantaged communities. So a lot of these community organizations that I mentioned who have been fighting for decades and decades and decades, for the first time, we're seeing record investment from their government into the issues that they really cared about. And a lot of that has been rolled back very, very, very hard. This administration also rescinded Executive Order 14096, which is revitalizing our nation's commitment to environmental justice for all. And that executive order, the purpose of it was to advance environmental justice across the federal government by requiring that each federal agency make achieving environmental justice part of its mission. And so there you would have the Department of Transportation looking at, its policies and making sure that it's not, putting highways in areas that would make it more difficult for communities of color to, access the resources that they need. And that's just no longer a thing. And so you also have sorry, the Department of Transportation recently rescinded. There's a lot of put out a memo recently, basically saying that it was going to stop doing that. All those things, we're no longer going to do those things. And on Friday, March the 7th, the Department of Justice actually announced that it was dropping a lawsuit in Louisiana. Against Dinka Performance Elastomer. And that lawsuit, the purpose of it was really to curb emissions of chloroquine, which is a carcinogenic chemical, in a region known as Cancer Alley. So the region is called Cancer Alley because there's a much higher influx of cancer in that community. And it's an 85-mile stretch of really heavily polluting industry along the Mississippi River. And that case in particular was touted as a landmark environmental justice case. And it punctuated, again, this decades-long battle on behalf of residents fighting for cleaner air and cumulative impacts from oil and gas facilities and petrochem facilities in Cancer Alley is a huge concern for residents. And so, we also had on 2 days ago, as a matter of fact, on March the 12th, the EPA announced what it's calling the greatest day of deregulation our nation has ever seen. And the new EPA administrator has publicly reframed the agency's mission as to being to lower the cost of buying a car, heating a home, and running a business. And so, some of the proposals included for reconsideration are power plant emission standards. You have wastewater rules for coal and other power plants, petrochem in emergency planning, greenhouse gas reporting requirements, and also the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or NAAQS, for particulate matter. And so the rollbacks of the PM standard it hits really hard because it would be particularly harmful for environmental justice communities. Every year, tens of thousands of people die prematurely from exposure to particulate matter, and people of color are disproportionately affected by that. And so the good news, sorry to dump all of that on you, but the good news is that there are federally mandated procedural requirements for deregulation. And so that does include a public notice and comment period. There's also state law, there's lots of states, despite the challenges at the federal level, that have included environmental justice protections, either sort of in their constitutions. For example, Pennsylvania has an environmental rights amendment to its constitution. New Jersey recently adopted an environmental justice statute, which requires or allows its environmental agencies or its agencies in general to consider environmental justice in permitting decisions. So it allows them to basically deny a permit for environmental justice reasons, which is huge. New York also has requires consideration of environmental justice in some of its permits. And there's also, common law is an often overlooked strategy in terms of dealing with environmental justice issues. Nuisance law is a great one. The idea behind nuisance law is that basically if you have sort of a corporation or facility that's causing it's called disrupting the quiet enjoyment of your home, or basically making it uncomfortable or difficult for you to live in your home and go about your normal daily activities. There are mechanisms that you can seek relief for that. There's also negligence, which basically the idea behind negligence is, corporations and companies are required to exercise reasonable care in preventing harm. And so if you are harmed by, someone's negligence, you can seek relief under that as well. There's also trespass. A lot of people don't think about trespass when you're talking about pollution, but, if you have a facility that's emitting stuff and you got dust or, PM or, just cellulose from, a cheese factory or, just random stuff falling onto your property that you don't want there. You do have recourse there as well. There's also strict liability, and strict liability is a little bit more complicated, but if you're talking about, chemical spills, industrial explosions, or other high risk activities, strict liability for ultra hazardous materials is a really good one, because intent doesn't matter when you're talking about strict liability. So even if the facility or the corporation, had no goal of causing you harm, if there was an explosion or you were, now exposed to these harmful chemicals, there's potentially a strict liability basis there as well. There's also a lot of resources for, information. I always tell people, you do not have to be an environmental lawyer or an environmental expert to help communities on the front line when they're trying to deal with these issues. The Environmental Law Institute, I am a board member, disclaimer. The Environmental Law Institute is a great resource for information on emerging issues related to environmental law. So Environmental Law Institute is an internationally recognized nonpartisan research organization. And they also have a pro bono clearinghouse. And so the pro bono clearinghouse connects attorneys to communities to solve pressing environmental problems. And so if you're interested in getting involved more directly, you can reach out to the Environmental Law Institute, see if there are any specific issues or any potential clients in your area that you could potentially help. There's also Environmental Justice State by State is another great resource. It's a website that literally it goes state by state. You can click on a map and just figure out what the environmental laws or environmental justice protections are in that state. There's also, I want to mention the importance of, just connecting with your nonprofit organizations or local nonprofit organizations or grassroots or frontline organizations in general, because with the recent rollbacks and cuts in funding, a lot of groups need support. They need support in grant writing, development, fundraising. Entity formation was always a big one when I was in the nonprofit space. I've sort of worked across the board in environmental justice. I've started cut my teeth on environmental justice in a very small, under-resourced nonprofit. And we always got questions about, can you help us, figure out our board governance information so we don't lose our, our grant funding. That's going to be particularly important for smaller organizations, newer organizations. So even if you don't necessarily have time to join a board, see if there's other ways that you can offer your expertise. Also, coalitions. Coalitions are going to be super key right now, especially with all the deregulation. I mentioned that there are federally mandated procedural requirements that the administration is going to have to go through to sort of get rid of these regulations. Well, part of that is the public notice and comment period. And so it's going to be so important for everyone to, I know it feels futile, but make sure you're making your voices heard. Why are these regulations important? Why do we need them? And there's literally a coalition for every environmental issue that you could possibly think of. I can't possibly name them all here, but do a quick Google and find a coalition that you're interested in and see how you can help support, because it's going to be so incredibly important in the coming days. And I have been talking for a very long time, so I'm going to stop. But I'm open for questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Ebony. You gave us a lot of information and already our call to action. So in our resources tab, either now or later, we will be able to get some of those coalitions that you mentioned in there so that folks can do those research. I love the website that you mentioned that can talk about the environmental laws state by state, because as we know, we are an amalgamation of states. And so what we do here in Michigan is going to be very different than what happens in Texas, but there are things that are available, tools that you all can use, but being able to find them may not be always easy. So we'll definitely make sure that we get that link so that you all can look at that. So now it's time we're going to engage with our panelists a little bit with some questions. So if you all have questions, don't forget to use the Q&A function on Zoom and ask questions of our panelists, and we'll get those to them in just a second. So Ebony talked a little bit about this already, but I'll ping this to you, Paul and Ruby. We saw a plethora of executive orders and memoranda that really left folks scrambling in the first couple of days of this new administration. But now we're just shy of 2 months in, and people are still trying to figure out which way is up. So what is the best way for us to figure out what is fact, to understand fact from fiction, and how to understand what these executive orders actually mean and how they actually impact us. I'll start with you, Paul.
Well, there's no one right answer to that, Keela, but what you need to do is find sources that are honest and complete and fair. And there are a number of places to go for that. For example, I know Just Security is an organization that has a running list of all the lawsuits that have been brought against all the orders, and it's up around 150 now. The ABA section of Civil Rights and Social Justice is going to be starting its rapid response program of putting out little 10-minute videos saying, what's the answer to this question or that question raised by these orders? And you know, obviously the media that is fair and honest about this kind of stuff, you have to be careful on social media these days, but you know, whether it's the New York Times or some other place that you find trustworthy, there is no single answer, and it is extraordinarily challenging to keep up with the fire hose here. That's in many ways the purpose of how so much is happening at the same time. I wish I could just tell everybody snap and this will get you everything, but you have to kind of look around and do your best.
Yeah, I agree with that. Ruby, Ebony, have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so just a few quick notes. So one, there are like executive orders that have real effects. And then there's also messaging or narrative executive orders, which just, you know, are designed to inflame. They further a message that doesn't really have a basis in reality. So one example is there's an executive order about immigrants' access to public benefits. And since the 1996 Clinton era welfare reform laws, most non-citizens are ineligible for public benefits, period. That's it, right? But this executive order basically says, like, we want to make sure that no one's receiving public benefits. Well, it's been the law for nearly 30 years. Yet, right? So like there are, you know, executive orders, or that, you know, the supposed justification for the, you know, in the executive orders is that something is happening, right? Like we expect any day now the use of the Alien Enemies Act to be used to deport people from the United States without any, you know, due process, right? It's the same law that was used in World War I and World War II that set up Japanese detention and more. Again, like when challenged, right, almost all these fail, right? And Paul talked about, you know, Just Security and other places. There are like immigration specific policy trackers. I'll put one in the chat here. The American Immigration Council is also a fantastic resource. If you follow them on Blue Sky, again, it's like all day, you know, this is what's happening. This is the reality. They're like correcting misperceptions. Again, go to trusted sources. These are the people who've been doing it for years, who know it. You know, the National Immigration Law Center has guides for, well, what does it mean if I, you know, have a domestic violence shelter? Is ICE permitted here? Are they not permitted? Can they go to the hospital? Like, what's a private space? What's a public space? You know, what are my rights in these settings, right? So again, go to the organizations that have been doing the advocacy and the research for decades, and rely on them, because they will really tell you fact from fiction.
Thanks, Ruby. And I'm going to lean into my auntie status real quick. So what is Blue Sky? Because I don't know that. What's that?
Blue Sky is the alternative to X, to Twitter. So,
okay,
you know, there's a lot of stuff on Facebook too. I did a presentation not too long ago to like university students, and I mentioned follow us on Facebook, and they all laughed at me. It's like, you know, that's where their parents get information, but it's not where they get information. Like we're usually communicating with their parents anyway, you know, on Facebook. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, even if you don't post, you know, it's a good place to lurk and hopefully not doom scroll too much.
Awesome. Thanks. Life comes at you fast.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm gonna stick with you, Ruby, real quick, because as recently as this week, we saw a permanent resident removed from his campus as a result of protesting late last year. How do we empower our communities to continue to use their voices when attempts like this are to silence them or to stoke fear in both citizens and non-citizens?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this requires a two-part answer. One is like, you know, as you correctly stated, like the purpose of these like big showy events, right? The purpose of like having, you know, the militarization and the use of every federal resource focused on immigration right now is to create fear, create chaos, create confusion, immobilize people and communities so that they're overwhelmed and don't know what to do, right? And it has worked. And like, we also know that like it's impossible to deport 14 million people overnight. Like, it's just logistically, and until or unless ICE has the resources, and God willing they don't, again, remembering like that a lot of this is messaging and it fuels a specific narrative that's being advanced, right? And in the same way, right, if this individual, Mahmoud Khalil, if there were actual ties to him, like being involved in anything terrorist related, right? Like, he would have criminal charges, and there aren't, right? So like, again, so this is how they're using it to like put us all on notice that like we do have power. And at the same time, like, I can't say don't be afraid, because like I can't tell you how to feel. But this, these actions are designed to instill and create fear in these communities. And right, people still have, the Constitution is not dead. People don't have to, the law says you do not have to let law enforcement into your home if they don't have a warrant. The law says you don't have to answer questions if you don't want to, right? That's, all of this protected, these protections still exist. And so, to the extent that we can invoke our rights and, hold, those individuals accountable for ensuring and enforcing that ensuring the law operates as it should, right? Our legislators in Congress, right? Like, they have responsibilities too, right? It's not just about the executive branch. The legislators in Congress, have oversight, and they have control of, we're seeing right now how much control they have over funding, but, ostensibly, right, they do have some control. So, demanding responses from them is really critical and important. And when we do have opportunities to fight deportation cases, we may not always win, but just having the ability to have access to justice and participating in a meaningful way, that is so important. And someone reminded me of a quote this year that like, everyone's positionality is different, right? Like, as, someone who's a lawyer, someone who's not a lawyer, someone who, whatever our positionality is, like, the quote, it's from Damian Barr, we are not all in the same boat, but we are all in the same storm, right? So that, we are all, enduring this together or responding to this together. And some of us have access to more resources or more privilege. And to the extent that we can use those privileges and resources, it's incumbent upon us to do so.
Ooh, that might be the takeaway from the boot camp, Ruby. So we're gonna hold on to that real tight. Thank you for that. Ebony, I'm going to switch over to you because Joy has a question for you. Joy has a two-part question, so get ready. The first one is, what was your journey to practice in environmental justice, and what kind of courses did you take or would you have wished to take in law school? And the second question is, how do we encourage Black and Brown communities to get more involved in environmental justice work when they may not see it as relevant to them?
Excellent questions, Joy. I'll try to make the first part really brief because I get real passionate when I talk about my journey to environmental justice. But I mentioned part of it briefly. So I originally went to undergrad because I wanted to be a doctor. And then somewhere around like organic chemistry to physics to, I was like, no, thank you, girl. And decided to look into something else. And so I went to law school thinking I wanted to be a healthcare attorney because, medical school, healthcare attorney, I didn't know anything about the law. I didn't have any lawyers in my family, nothing. I did not know. I just knew I had to take the LSAT and it was 3 years. And then I would be a lawyer after I got done. So I thought I wanted to be a healthcare attorney, did my 1L summer associate situation in a firm, had a healthcare project, once again was like, no, girl, no, thank you, not this. But I also had an environmental law project, and that was interesting to me because there was science involved. And so I could kind of link all the science that I took on my pre-med journey to environmental law. And so then I took environmental law and heard the term environmental justice. And from then I was hooked, like I said. But from there, it was a very, very windy journey to actually being able to work in environmental justice. Because when I graduated law school in the way back days, it does not feel like it was the way back days, but the way back days, environmental justice was a thing, but there weren't a lot of jobs in environmental justice, right? Like it was a concept. Again, folks have been fighting for this for decades, but there weren't a lot of attorney jobs or, big girl jobs in environmental justice. And so I did a judicial clerkship. I did that for a year. I applied to all of the like EPA summer honors programs. I applied to all of the jobs at the EPA. I ended up doing regulatory compliance counseling for a while. And then my good friend, this woman named Keela Crane, sent me a posting for a job in Philadelphia. I was in DC at the time. And it was for a community lawyer focused on food systems, environmental justice. And I was like, absolutely, had at this point, I don't think ever been to Philly, applied. They took a chance on me. I got the job and it truly changed my life. And from then, I have just been really trying to fight the good fight. And so I did a good bit of work there. I was there for about 5 to 6 years, working directly with community organizations. I did what I would call community lawyering, working with community orgs, nonprofits to figure out what the specific issues were in their neighborhoods and then working together to develop strategies to combat those issues. So sometimes that was, all right, we're going to draft some letters to city council and see if we can get hearings on this issue. Sometimes that was, okay, well, we're going to try to sue these folks and see what can be done. Sometimes it was, okay, well, we're going to write a letter to CSX and see, if they will stop, idling their trains in this neighborhood, in this backyard. It was a lot of sort of really close work with communities. And I really, really, really love that work. And then sort of along that way, I started to get very frustrated because I was seeing how hard it was to make sort of systemic change. And I started working a little bit more in policy. And that sort of led me to Earth Justice. So I was at Earth Justice for a while doing policy works. I was a baby lobbyist, and really working, trying to develop laws in Congress. So I had the good fortune to be involved in policy during the Biden administration, and so it was really, really, really exciting to sort of see, how things unfolded during that time. And then very recently, I switched over to a private law firm, and now I am doing environmental justice work on the plaintiff side. And so now I am bringing those common law lawsuits, and it's been a really great journey. I love the work that I do. It makes me feel fulfilled. I definitely, like to encourage law students to look into environmental justice because, like you said, a lot of our community, they don't know what environmental justice is. What I found has been sort of helpful in my work is to speak in English, right? I think a lot of times we make things really complicated, but when you talk to people about like what the impacts are versus what the issues are, like don't go to the community and talk to them about particulate matter. Say, that dust, that, the fact that your kid has asthma, that might be related to that power plant that's up the block that you don't like the way that it sounds. And it's really just, speaking to people in language that they understand in terms that are important to them, because a lot of people don't know, like you said, that the issues that they're dealing with are environmentally related.
Thank you so much, Ebony. That was melded both of those very, very well. Thank you. And I'm honored to be a part of your journey. So thank you for the shout out. Appreciate you. Paul, this year marks 60 years of the Voting Rights Act. However, we know that there, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, there have been constant battles to water down the Voting Rights Act. And what we are seeing right now is HR 22, commonly referred to as the SAVE Act, has the potential to really wreak havoc on people's access to register to vote and participate in the process. And with the federal government's Civil Rights Division, DOJ Civil Rights Division, all but shut down, how do we protect all eligible citizens' right to vote, including future new citizens?
Well, obviously there are challenges, and those challenges are, as I suggested, made worse by the fact that we don't have an effective Justice Department. Even during good times, they don't have the powers they used to have of denying preclearance. They don't have the information flow that used to come from that preclearance process. But now that we have a kind of a malign group of people, if there are anybody at all in the Civil Rights Division, it's just not a big part of the picture. But that doesn't mean that there aren't robust organizations out there. I was at one for the last 8 years called Campaign Legal Center. There's the Legal Defense Fund, there's the ACLU, and a dozen other organizations I could name, which are actively working now for voting rights. And one of the reasons for that is because the last 4 years, we've been seeing just these wild claims of voting fraud and used as excuses to put all kinds of crazy burdens on voting. And the SAVE Act is part of that process. It's making it onerous ID requirements that are going to make it hard for people to register, particularly people whose names have changed, and the like. It is a truly scurrilous piece of legislation, and hopefully won't get through. But the institutions are out there. And in addition to the national groups that you could name, there are organizations in every state. There's the League of Women Voters in every state. There's Common Cause chapters. There's just an awful lot of ways in which people can get involved. And that fight is continuously being waged. It's not like this is a new fight. We've been fighting for full voting equality since at least the Civil War. And we had the Voting Rights Act, which changed the world dramatically. We had a multiracial democracy for a while. We're losing some of it, but that doesn't mean the fight's going to stop. I can tell you from personal experience, there are a ton of people out there working day in and day out to try to push back on this, just as there are in Ruby's area or in Ebony's area. They're just one of the things that people don't always appreciate about the legal profession is there's an awful lot of people doing an awful lot of important work for the country. And that's kind of what this whole boot camp is about.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can ping on the end of yours, Paul, I would also say that there are efforts to enshrine HR 22 on the state level. I'm at a state agency that implements voting rights, and we have seen that here in our state and several other states that are trying to pass laws. So one of the ways that you all can get involved is to pay attention to what happens in your state capitals as well, and engage with your state legislators as well as your state administrative folks, right? So whoever administers elections in your state, reach out to them and let them know how you feel about the laws that may be contemplated or passed in your state, and really get involved on that level, because everything doesn't necessarily happen at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest. Some of it happens on Capitol Street Northwest in Lansing, or in
Especially in the voting
Tallahassee.
area, yeah. In Keeler, the voting area, state law is an extraordinarily important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. And an interesting thing is that it melds a lot of the things that we've been talking about, right? So this law in particular is talking about a documentary proof of citizenship. I encourage you all to go to congress.gov and input HR 22 to look at the bill and see what it's talking about. But the question is, of course, how does one prove that they are a citizen? And the examples of what they're trying to do, sometimes it's very onerous for some folks because they just don't have the information, or something could have happened and their information is lost or stolen or whatever else. But putting additional barriers for folks to be able to exercise their right to vote is not what we should be doing.
Well, and it's all based on this theory connecting up with Ruby's work that basically there's a ton of non-citizens in this country who come in here to vote. And we had Elon the other day saying that we have the Democrats importing people to turn them into voters. The evidence makes it extraordinarily clear that people do not come into this country when they're not citizens to try to vote.
If it were as simple as just filling out a form so you could register to vote and then to become a citizen and vote, like I would be out of a job, right? Like everyone would have just done so, right? So yeah, the amount of misinformation and spin is remarkable, but like we've known that the entire election cycle, and certainly now like they're not going to take their foot off the gas.
Right. We just have to keep fighting.
Jordan in the chat is mentioning that it may be 0.001%. And Jordan, I think you might can add a couple of zeros to that. It is very, very small. It's like counting grains of sand in the Sahara Desert about how often this happens. Our good friends at the Brennan Center of New York University has a lot of data about that, so I encourage you to go to their website. But it is a scintilla of an amount given the amount of votes that are actually cast that this where this happens. So it's a problem. But in the last couple of minutes that we have left to talk with you all and engage with y'all, I'm going to ask our panelists to do their level best to give me about a 90-second charge to our audience. They have been engaged for 8 hours over 2 days, talking about many different things that are impacting our world. So what is the charge that you give to them as we go forward and effectuate change in our local communities all the way on up? So I'm going to go in reverse order. So Ebony, you're up.
All right, thank you. My charge, I think I gave a bit of it, but find your local community organizations, your frontline organizations, your grassroots organizations, your coalitions, and figure out what they need. Figure out what you as an individual can do to support. Don't make it too hard. You don't have to be an environmental law expert. You don't have to be an expert in doing anything, really. There are so many needs, so much low-hanging fruit that is available to really help communities in these dire times. There was a question in the chat that I'm going to pin on so that I can answer that as well in terms of community lawyering and how to make it successful. There has to be an organizational shift. The organizational shift that I'm talking about is being willing to follow the lead of the community as an organization. And so this means in the way that you write grant proposals, the type of grant conditions that you accept, a shift from saying, I'll bring 3 cases related to this issue this year, as opposed to I'm going to work with X number of community groups to help them identify their issues and develop plans together for them. Also focus on systemic and sustainable issues, sustainable changes. So that things that are sustainable for the community organization to implement when you are long gone. So that means a huge focus on community education, lots of grant writing courses, relationship building, things like that, that will really help to sort of empower community groups to be able to continue to advocate for themselves when the organization that you work for, when you yourself is no longer there.
Thank you so much, Ebony. I gave Ebony a bias and bounce so she can tack on to that last question. Thanks, Ebony. Ruby, you're up next. What is your charge for us today?
So I talked about this earlier about being in the same storm. I want to add that, in this storm, you are lawyers or lawyers to be. And you have an incredible tool, an incredible ability to be able to respond to this storm in ways that most other people can't, just due to being a member of the bar. And I implore you to use that. Obviously boundaries are important. And at the same time, don't forget that your job is to protect the Constitution, regardless of who you work for as a member of the bar. And that, if we're not doing that, then forget it, right? So regardless of what you're focusing on, ensure that your ability to do your work and to participate in the democracy and the legal system is incumbent upon you as a member of the bar. And, one place where, this administration and others in the past have been held accountable is in the courts of law. And until or unless that changes, that's what we must continue to do. Echo everything else that Ebony said, focus on the local, focus on stuff that's within your capacity. Tell yourself or remind yourself of the serenity prayer or whatever, equivalent you have. There's stuff within your control and there's stuff outside of your control. Keep that in mind as you go about day to day, right? Focus on today. What can you do today? Not catastrophizing about what's going to happen in 6 months or a year.
Awesome. You see why we have the winners and the best right here in our Great Lakes State of Michigan. Thanks, Ruby. We'll round it out with our vice chair, Paul.
Thanks, Gila. Let me just endorse everything that Ruby and Ebony just said, and maybe put it this way. We've all been losing sleep the last 6 or 8 weeks about where this country is going, whether this is really the end of constitutional democracy, and all of the harm that is going to be done in lots of specific areas. And I think the advice that you get from people about how to push back against this kind of attack on the basic constitutional values of the country is that one person can't fix the whole problem. But what really is necessary for your own good and for the good of the country is that everybody be trying to fix one piece of the problem. And you will be a much happier person and maybe sleep a little better if you find something to get hooked up with. And very often in your local community, there's an existing organization. The Google machine is very useful for finding these things, that is already on the ground advocating, showing up at meetings, pushing back, doing on the issue that you care about. And so I think, especially as lawyers who have the ability to do things at a time when the legal profession and the legal system are perhaps more important than they've ever been, we really need to do everything we can to stand up for the rule of law, stand up for basic values of equality and liberty. And I hope every one of you who sat through this entire boot camp, which has been amazing, will actually take that message away and do what you can. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul. We appreciate your leadership and your continuous fight for justice as you are working there with students at Georgetown Law School, Law Center. Well, let me say thank you, everybody. We made it through. So I hope you feel empowered by our panelists, and not only about the work that they do, but the passion in which they do it. So thank you so much for joining us for this free session. The section on civil rights and social justice provides free webinars and resources just like this for legal professionals and advocates nationwide. And we hope that this helps you in your work as we continue to fight for our communities all across the nation. So again, if you can, please consider to join and become active with the ABA, and especially the Civil Rights and Social Justice section. We have just one more thing to do, which is to talk to our chair, Lacey Durham, and our chair-elect, Mario Sullivan. So if you want to pop on over there to hear their close out for the day, we'll be all set. Thank you all. See you.